Well, if you can remember, Uwe Roschmann just opened this second event track, the cookieless world, and this is exactly where we want now to pick up again with our next speaker, Achim Schlosser. Achim is a member of the executive board at the European Net ID Foundation, and as a CTO, he's responsible for the products around single sign-on and consent management, and he drives their strategic development. So all in all, we can say, since he graduated as a computer scientist, Achim is obsessed by data-driven topics. And today in his keynote, Achim will discuss how the technologies, just as first-party data and ID solution, will shape the digital marketing of the future. Achim, nice to see you, nice to have you on this stage. I would say the stage is yours. Much joy.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. My pleasure to be at the Douglas Retail Summit 2022. My job today is to share a bit of insights into what's happening in the post-cookie environment, how the platforms and the solutions will look like, specifically looking at the past 4 years of myself doing this and kind of like having an overview on what we're doing ourselves, our partners are doing, and what's happening with the platforms. So I think looking back at Daniel's and also Jessica's presentations or keynotes this morning, I think this is really a complicated discussion looking back in the past couple of years. But I think realistically today it's quite clear what the options are, what options are on the table. The only question that remains is who executes them and how well they are executed. So let's dive into it, I would say. And before we actually talk about the how and the why and what needs to be done and what options are on the table for in the context of identity solution and first-party data, I think it's also worthwhile to take a step back and think about, okay, what do we need to achieve? So the what. So and that's not going to change actually in the future. So there will still be an expectancy that in terms of digital advertising, you have a means to measure your campaign effectiveness. You have a means of attributing your campaign spend. You want to control effectiveness of your campaigns, so that won't go away. The second bucket, I think that Jessica was talking about in terms of audience activation, more generally, I think should be called addressability in a sense. So can you reach these audience that you might know based on data, and can you reach them where, right? Cross-device, on which devices, where they are present. So that's a key aspect of future solutions. The third one, obviously, is what are the insights into the target groups about their behavior, can actually find them, how can you optimize them, how can you engage with them. And most probably the thing that might be the most important for the future is a topic around safety and compliance, respectively, specifically in the context of first-party data. It's not only about brand safety, brand safe environments, but it's really how can you leverage data that you acquired yourself from your customers in a safe and sustainable fashion. So quickly looking at the why, I think we already had an impulse speech on the general topic, but just a bit more fluffy here. So if you ask an AI how cookie deprecation looks like, this is what you get back. So a nice fluffy monster that looks suspiciously at cookies. What's the story behind this? I think in general, two learnings here. Suspicion phases, I think, over. Platforms are very well aware of how digital advertising works today, both browser and on the mobile platforms, and they know how to intervene in it. I think we are all aware of that. So the situation we're talking about is much broader than just cookie deprecation as much as we use cookie today, but it actually covers anything that is currently being used in the status quo. And that means fingerprints, that means mobile ad IDs, which are restricted through ATT, and with the announcement of the privacy sandbox on Android might go away completely. We have IP masking technologies that's most probably going to be rolled out successively over the past few years. It's already a paid feature on iOS. Google recently announced that they'll make it a free feature for anyone that buys a Pixel phone. So that goes away too. So platforms are really pushing hard such that any type of data-based campaigning can only be done by data that is collected by first party. So the question is then how do these solutions look like? So what's the problem here? I think it's quite obvious. Today, the majority of data in campaigning is third-party data that is kind of like attached to cookie IDs, to IP addresses, to fingerprints, to all the alike mobile ad IDs. And the more these data points go away, the less data is available. So figuratively speaking, the well dries out. And that's a key problem, because if you don't have IDs, you don't have data, you don't have addressability, and you won't be able to find any audiences anymore without looking into the specific details. And all of the functions of digital advertising, the four ones that I was alluding to, they all depend on data being available. So the question is, what are you doing then? And that brings you to the point, okay, the well is drying out. What should you do? Well, fill it up again, right? So, and that means you kind of like have to build a successful data strategy at first, right? So the whole topic around first-party data obviously revolves around having such. And for me, there are three pillars to that. The first one is consent, user transparency, and the ability to abide by data subject rights. So if you're investing into building a sustainable user relation, you obviously want to be able and ensure that you're clear on regulatory environment requirements, and that you're also able to make to user transparent what you're doing with their data and how you can actually abide by data subject rights, which is, I think, let's say, to a degree challenging in the current environment. The other thing is obviously scalability, how well and who can actually scale a data strategy, and who does it and who can do it. And the third one is most probably the most important, also in the Reader Media context. What is a sustainable way to do data collaboration and data usage? Because sustainable in a way such that you retain control of data that is used for campaigning, such that you can control whose partner you are trusting and who is actually able to process and provide functionality based on that data. So unfortunately, and that's a bit of the bummer, the reality is in the future environment, there is no free lunch anymore, right? So in the past, I think in the classical display business, people just were used to just, okay, I add another pixel, I have this vendor running, there's more data available, my revenue goes up, I can provide better fraud services and stuff like that. So that's unfortunately over, so no free lunch anymore. So the question is how you deal with that and who's playing which role in that environment. So, what's at stake? What can you do? And I think in general, it's just quite simple. There are two paths you can go forward with, and most probably you will do both. So, how can you actually reach critical mass, right? Because for a buyer, critical mass will be of importance, right? Just reaching one user is not good enough. So, how can you do all of that across sites, across device and stuff like that? So what's obviously on the table is platform APIs, right? Most of you might know that in the context of what Google calls the privacy sandbox, which offers advertising related APIs on device. Apple is a bit further ahead in that, which already has click measurement and attribution APIs as part of iOS and the Safari browser. The problem with that is obviously you're then kind of like steered externally, right? I like to call these the benevolent dictator models, where the platform is actually willing to talk to you and appreciate that you kind of like need a measurement solution, but only under their terms, right? So that means in the end, they will talk to you about it, but they will have the final say on how it works, and maybe you're not seeing any data at all when you're using these APIs. The other big bet and the other big chance is actually, and that's the specific chance also, and the reality behind retail media is really the use and the collaboration of what I call compatible first-party data. And that's what Jessica was also talking about, these first and second-party environments. So as soon as one first party collaborates with another, depending on the channel, you basically call this first or second party, depending on who is acting in the specific scenario. The compatibility bit, I think, goes beyond just knowing that somebody might be the same person on different channels, but it's really about, can you also ensure and sustainably use that data, because the user is aware of that, he has the right consents in place, and all of these parties know each other, right? So this entanglement that you have in the current programmatic ecosystem, for example, won't be sustainable for the future. So in terms of first-party models, basically, they will scale as well as first-party can retain and attract customers, and that's obviously one of the big things and why retail media is so attractive, because there are already many eyeballs. So the question is, how can you build a sustainable retail media business around this? But the view across channels, right? I think we just saw in the masterclass a customer journey that ran through a variety of channels. That'll only be possible when these parties that are engaged in this customer funnel actually actively collaborate and have an agreement to leverage that data for that purpose. And obviously, I think that's also a reality that everyone is aware of. In terms of data quality, login-based models are obviously going to be the gold standards in terms of deterministic, sustainable cross-device user engagement, but they will scale as good as your user convenience is, and also as good as you can kind of like ensure a sustainable customer relation in terms of being able to control the use of the data. And I think the other third reality is that, and I think that's a good takeaway for everyone, if you're not a D2C brand in the future, maybe you don't actually need to build your own first-party data structure, because you might just use a lot of that functionality that I was talking about just by leveraging first-party data of publishers, of retail media publishers, and other parties in the ecosystem. But you don't necessarily need them to actually fulfill this functionality, other than, let's say, obviously, the retargeting case for your own audiences. But I think the key takeaway for me is, after having a lot of discussions with market participants, that data free float is over, right? So if you work with first-party data, you have to use it transparently and in a controlled manner. So now, how does the collaboration work? To close off my short presentation, I think there is a lot of magic floating around in the industry with new terminologies, right? So you might have heard of differential privacy, privacy-enhancing technology, clean rooms, identity resolution, tokenized identity, and so on and so on. This is all not magic, honestly. It's really about if you have compatible data and how trustworthy you can use it. So, quick example, I think most of you most probably looked into clean rooms. Basically, what's happening in a clean room scenario. So you have a customer interaction, for example, specifically on an e-commerce site, user shows interest, for example, in buying something, right? That is kind of like a login interaction, and that is kind of like persisted in a trusted environment, typically a clean room maybe in the future. And then you might have an advertiser, a publisher, retail media publisher, that kind of like has eyeballs, right? The user engages with them. And now the question is, in the future, if you can approach them, also puts this data into a trusted environment. The question is now not how do you do it technically, how it's encrypted, blah, 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 but is that data actually compatible, right? From an origin perspective, where does it come from? Does it have fitting privacy controls such that the user has transparency about the usage? And if so, we can technically then build data processing chains where you employ an encrypted matching algorithm that then results in a retargeting audience. But the core is that at the source, data needs to be compatible, and you have to know that it's the same user. Other example, I think that is maybe based on more predominantly deployed stuff today. Same stuff, you have multiple events happening, users visiting different sites, and the typical ID resolution setup is like that these first parties need to give data to the identity resolution solution. That is obviously then encrypted, but that's actually a detail. And then basically some party needs the ability to decrypt that data, and that's typically the DSP in that setup where you book your campaigns. So you need to trust the ID solution to a degree, and you need to trust a couple of DSPs where you would allow that matching of the data to happen. And as a result, you might do audience retargeting, activating audiences, and measurement. So it's not magic, it's really about sustainably using first-party data. And to close off my quick impulse speech here, the starting point of every use case in the future with first-party data is really compatible data. Compatible data where you know which party you're interacting with, how it is used, and how you can actually make the use transparent and also abide by data subject rights in terms of using that data. New technology like clean rooms, PETs, are based entirely on this foundation, right? If your clean room doesn't have compatible data, it's useless. But the ability or the good thing about them is they secure data more rigidly. And they enable the use of data without sharing it too much. But it's certainly not the only way to do it, right? Like we've seen in the other example. I think the strategic bit that you need to take home is how do you actually want to work with data? How should it be used? How can it be accessed, and by whom? And that's the critical questions, I think, where we will also deep dive into the panel now. So thanks for your time, and that's it.
As you said, we will see you in some seconds and minutes at the panel discussion. So it was a pleasure to have you on this stage, and the viewers can see you in some minutes and some seconds on the other stage. So thank you very much, Achim Schlosser.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.